My first memory with the ocean is when I was 6 years old. I went to learn to sail on those very, very small dinghy. In France, we call them optimistes. They're very squarish, they're very inefficient, but they are great to learn. They took us out on a day that seemed to be a nice day, and suddenly there was a storm. And the waves became really big, and I remember all the other kids were crying, and I was just loving it. I was just loving the intensity of the storm. And I'm just thinking, like, this is powerful. I love the power of the sea and the wave and the winds. When I was a kid in France, in Brittany, there was the Erika, which was a very big oil spill happening in France as well. And when that happened, I was really shocked. I saw the sea being destroyed by the oil, and I saw all these dead birds and all the dead fish and all the fishermen losing their job. I was really, really shocked. And then when it happened again in the Gulf of Mexico, it was like a big recall of that emotion. I remember having the exact same sensation that when I saw my older brother being beat up, being bullied. Like it was the same sensation that a family member of mine is being abused. And so that made me incredibly angry. Like it's personally it's worse than being beaten myself, you know, it's because you feel so powerless. The BP oil spill, you know, was not just an environmental catastrophe, but it's also a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Then it prompted me to realize, like, I think I can do something about it. And so I started working on technologies to clean up the BP oil spill.
Into digital fabrication in a very interesting way. I was a producer, writer, director for documentaries, specifically science, technology, and medicine. That was my beat, so to speak. And I came to MIT, I met with Professor Gershenfeld, Neil, and we sat down and we had an interview, and it was the most interesting hour I had ever had.
So, from rapid prototyping on molecular scales, we're going to go to a next lab, which is one size up. This is an interesting one. This lets you image down to almost atomic scales. It lets you map the elements of the materials, and then it lets you pattern them.
The man is amazing, and he speaks science. And I walked out of that interview saying, that was really, really interesting. I would love to be a part of this story. It's really, really exciting.
One of my least favorite questions is like, is it physics or is it computer science or is it manufacturing? And you know, I want to be asked, is it interesting or is it important, but not where that boundary is. And so in stages that led with a number of colleagues to founding the Center for Bits and Atoms to do research right at that boundary. And to create CBA, we put together one of almost every machine to make anything. So tools to make nano, meso, micro, macro things. And we assembled all these tools and then had a problem. It would take a lifetime of classes to learn how to use them. And so with colleagues here, we started a class, How to Make Almost Anything.
I decided to take the course, How to Make Almost Anything. You would learn how to use all the tools and processes of digital fabrication, along with some electronics and programming. And it would allow you to make almost anything that you could imagine. And that changed almost everything. I realized at that moment that I loved making and understanding how to make technology, how to create my own technological future. And we have the opportunity with these tools to do this in a much more distributed way so that you don't have, wood that travels all around the world before it comes to your home. And we can do it sustainably for our planet and more cost effectively for us as individuals. And it was so empowering that I felt like this should be a right, that this should be a right for every child or for every adult in the world.
It's become one of the most oversubscribed classes at MIT, and we were overwhelmed. Every year, hundreds of students want to try to get in the class, and initially it had room for 10 people. And year after year, students say they've had these complete life-transforming experiences. It's the most important class they've done. We didn't plan it with that kind of agenda. These advanced tools are, locked away in this research facility for a small number of people. But one of the most exciting things happening is the moves to democratize access to these capabilities.
The How to Make Almost Anything course really was, in some ways, inspiration for the Global Fab Lab network.
Fab Labs are about digital fabrication, which means you can design something and then a robotic machine will make it, bring it into life.
All of these tools, these digital fabrication tools, were becoming smaller, cheaper, more accessible. And our goal really was to put these into communities around the world and kind of ask the question, if you had both the tools and the know-how, what would you do with that?
When we introduced the lab, people started trying new things, and now some users, they are making profit out of it.
We can connect people to work with Jewish and Arab together. And you see that when you make things, people don't think about religion. They only think about how to make it and collaborate.
I think Fab Labs and makerspaces are really all the same. And I think the template for that comes from Neil. And I think that's what the maker movement represents. It's not just a collection of tools, it's the people in it. That's where the real value comes from.
Legendary security researcher, Bunnie Huang. He's going to be taking the stage next. You may know Bunnie from his time at MIT, where he was both a hacker in the MIT sense and a hacker in the much broader sense, including some really groundbreaking work on reverse engineering on the Xbox.
The hacker spirit has been around forever, right? Hollywood did a big, almost campaign to reinvent what a hacker meant, to be a little more nefarious, a little more exciting. They type 3 things and then oh my God, we're in the computer and and then the lights are flashing and it's it doesn't work that way, guys. The reality is it's a lot of hard work and then you're just kind of grinding at it and it's a lot of it's in your head. So it's come to sort of engender a bit of fear in people when they say you're a hacker, or you're gonna take my data or whatever. Or I could fix your phone, right? Or I could improve your phone, right? Those are also things I could do.
Hello. On behalf of everyone here at Chumby Industries, I'd like to welcome you to our interactive guided tour.
The original Chumby was just a little sort of 3.5-inch screen that showed apps. We called them widgets at the time. And it was plugged in and sat by your bedside, and the idea was you check it in the morning.
There's all kinds of content: news, photos, clocks, watch lists, music.
This is before the iPhone, right? So before the iPhone, we're essentially trying to invent something like that platform, right? So hopped on a plane to China, because that's where things are built, and just had to figure it out. When I started that, probably the biggest production run I ever done was like 50 units. I'd never done any real mass production. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. It didn't matter. It's a startup, right? They had lots of money and a lot of, let's go do it. And so then that was the beginning of that adventure. And we struggled to sort of build it, got it out, and launched it. And then just like a couple years later, the iPhone came out. And we looked at it and went like, oh, well, that's pretty good. And it had apps, and everyone wanted to write for it, and they had millions and millions of users, and it could make phone calls. It had all this utility. And so we were then having to compete with Apple in terms of getting that real estate by your bed, right? It was obviously really tough. In a way, it was validating that people wanted the concept, but the execution of the iPhone obviously is so much better. And so that was sort of like the long, slow decline of Chumby, and I don't even really know where it ended up anymore.
I moved to the place where my subject of research was, which is the BP oil spill. I wanted to do something more tangible, work on the ground, get my hands dirty, help the people on the ground. And so I moved to the Gulf of Mexico, in the city of New Orleans, in Louisiana. So I realized that where the oil is coming is very predictable. It's where the wind is blowing. And I thought, well, could we use the wind, which is the driving force for the oil, use it as a form of energy to move a machine to catch the oil? And the best one that I could think of was a sailboat. And I started to hack some small sailboats to try to see if I could pull a lot of oil absorbent 90 degrees to the wind. Because when the oil is coming down like this, if you go like this, very quickly you're going to accumulate in one point. But if the oil is coming down like this and you have a sponge and you're perpendicular, you can actually absorb a lot. So I thought, could I change the boat physics so that the whole boat becomes an organ to turn left or right, to maneuver? And I developed a new type of robot called Prote, which is a shape-shifting sailing robot. So I remember I spent the weekend going in the lake to test it. It was a brown boat, and it was articulated, and it just looked like the spine of a dinosaur. It looked like a fossil. It didn't look like a new technology. It looked like something that Indiana Jones would dig out of the ground, or something like that. And I started to bend it, and I put it in the water, and it was just sailing, and I was just like, wow, it's sailing really amazingly well. Like the way it tracks and how it turns and the way it sort of changes the center of gravity and leans into the turns, and it's super stable. And I couldn't really believe my eyes when I saw it first moving. I was just like, wow, this thing is moving like a fish. Working in a garage in New Orleans, I was really broke. I was really on low budget. But I had the internet. We organized a crowdfunding campaign because we didn't want to go through the traditional university grants. Then it caught up like wildfire. Like suddenly, like tens of people contacting me and say, "This is technological breakthrough."
Prote may be the first sailing boat in history that can do this, inaugurating an entirely new family in ocean robotics.
So far, the Prote team has built and tested 5 prototypes.
Beyond oil spills, Prote would be suitable for collecting plastic debris in the ocean and for many other ocean research applications.
we fundraised $30,000, which back then on Kickstarter was huge. And from there, we built the largest prototype, and we kept iterating from there, and we just kept building more and more prototypes. So this is prototype 11.1 with a rotating mass and FSG2D. And what we have here...
One of the important things to recognize about making is that it's largely a prototyping revolution rather than a manufacturing revolution. So manufacturing kind of means making the same thing at scale, like hundreds of thousands. But prototyping is making the first of a thing, and that's when you're testing it. And then you make a change to it and you make it again.
The sort of desire to have an investor came after we ran out of money, basically. We just realized, okay, this technology has a lot of potential. We can reduce the fuel, we can improve efficiency, stability. So I thought, well, if you could find an investor into this, it can surely improve navigation and safety on board. So based on that realization, we found an investor in San Francisco. I traveled to San Francisco. I met this guy who said that he was going to give us $10,000 every month for 2 years for 10% of the company. So that was great because that would mean as well that the company would be worth $2 million. So I started to invest into machinery, hiring a team, renting a studio. And then after 3 months of negotiation, the investor basically said he was not going to invest in the company. Losing that investor put me in a lot of debts, and I didn't want to borrow more money. And so sleep on a friend's couch, but after 2 months I basically became homeless and sleeping in the street for a couple of days. And eventually I found a rooftop, and I built myself a big tent on the rooftop of in London.
Every failure should be new and interesting, and ideally fail quicker than later, right? So sometimes it's inevitable that you have to put a lot of work in and find that you did something wrong. But if you can find a way to sort of just put a trial balloon out there and not spend a lot of money and fail, that's always better.
Lost in the fog, in the heart on the harbor, I'm caught by the tide, in a boat with no anchor, I'm sailing away to an island that can't be found.
After Chumby went belly up, I was pretty burned out. I decided I wanted to take some time and try to figure out, find that magic again, find the bits of my soul that I lost along the way, and take a year off and kind of engage in what I call the monastic study of manufacturing. I gained a profound respect for the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem. And I think probably the most interesting part was it opened up my eyes to alternate ways of thinking about intellectual property. So before I went to China, everyone was worrying they're going to steal all your stuff, right? They're just copycats, they're thieves, right? Like literally these are the words that were used. Like it almost became a mission for me to figure out like how do I line up my existing understanding of IP versus the evidence that was in front of me, like plain as I could see, that something was working, right? What was the differences? And so I actually went through this very long sort of exploration into like sort of the Shenzhen ecosystem, figuring out like how it worked. It's one thing to sort of view it on the side. It's another thing to be like, all right, today I am going to figure out how to hack an iPhone or whatever it is, right? What are the parts I need? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to like talk to these technicians who are working and I'm going to say, where did you buy that from? Like, how did you learn about this? You know, I just, in my broken Chinese, I try to communicate. And they're very friendly, actually. They'd be like, oh, yeah, no, over here, blah, 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 whatever it is. Get your screwdrivers over here, and you want to use a razor blade like this. And they would just, they were very open and willing to sort of tell me about it. And I would buy it, and I would go home that night, and I would try it out. I would do this thing where I would just not really have anything on the plate, and I would just build something, and it's amazing what you can do. Like, basically, you can arrive in there with a few hundred renminbi in your pocket, and the next day you'll have like a top-notch rework bench, like a full hardware bench. So the Chinese Shenzhen idea and the maker spirit both come from sort of a common root idea that you can do it yourself.
As an entrepreneur, I was homeless. It's really challenging to have a laptop when you have no electricity and no Wi-Fi. Like, it's hard to stay dry. You know, like when you're in the street, like, and it's raining, like how? Where's the toilet? You know, where's the shower? Like all these basic stuff, like lacking. So you have to. I mean, paradoxically, you have to be extremely organized. So for 4 solid months, I was basically using London hackerspace for free and building Protea out of trash that I was finding on the street. But based on those prototypes and the progress that we continue to make, I kept using the Wi-Fi from the neighbors and we kept applying for competitions, and we got accepted into another incubator called Unreasonable at Sea. So it's like a business mentorship program that is based inside of a university, and the university is on a ship, and that ship travels all around the world. So we basically got onto that ship in San Francisco, and then went to Mexico and across to Hawaii and Yokohama, Japan, China, India, Mauritius, South Africa, Ghana, Morocco, Spain, and across the Atlantic. So we just sailed around the world, and this is how I came to Hong Kong. I came to Hong Kong by ship, and this is how I discovered the place where most of the parts, the electronics and the plastic of the robots were made. They all come from here. So I went to see my suppliers and just decided to move here.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in Shenzhen and kick off Maker Fair. I was here last year, and it has certainly grown in size and complexity. An article, How Shenzhen Became the Center of Maker Manufacturing.
China has the entrepreneurial and industrial kind of side of it. You know, they could make anything and they'll make it very fast. They just want to figure out what's going to be popular in the market.
The US has this term open source, but it's actually rooted in a legal concept. Like it's actually, but the Chinese version of sharing is similar in many ways, but not rooted in any legal concepts. And if you have the means of production, really what you want is you want the sale. And so you want to share openly and quickly and compete on production quality and not so much around legal barriers at the end of the day. And the maker spirit is almost ironic in that it's a rediscovery of things that were values in the Western ecosystem but got lost. So then makerism in the US became sort of a rediscovery, like, oh wait, we did this before, we can do it again. But whereas You know, Shanzai is more the, you know, just the pipeline, right? It was just like, we're going to do it, and we know how to do it, right, kind of thing. Actually being able to do what I want without having investors to force me into a mold and force me not to take risks has enabled me to do crazy things I never thought I could do before. There are some limitations to doing it, but I find what I gain in personal freedom, intellectual freedom, and being able to align with my ethic. And so actually, since then, I've been on gap year like eternally, right? it's like a decade of gap year. Like.
You know, I'm half French, half Japanese. I'm a world citizen. I just go wherever I need to go. Like, I'm not attached to a particular place. But I found that Hong Kong, I love the speed, I love the flexibility of people, I love the sort of can-do attitudes that a lot of people have. I found that it's an extraordinary place to come up with innovation. You can find parts very easily, you can manufacture them quite easily and export them even more easily. So when I came to Hong Kong, we still had a good amount of money in the bank accounts. A friend from school, from back in the days in London, came from Hong Kong. And it turns out that his family were chicken farmers in the New Territories, in Cam Tin, in Yuen Long. And you know, in Hong Kong, you can't farm chicken anymore since the chicken flu. So they had vacant building. They had a vacant chicken coop. And so I thought, well, this is a perfect place for me to build my factory. And then I started really missing the sort of emulation that I had when I was a researcher, when I was at MIT or the Royal College of Arts or on the ship. And I really missed that mix of science, technology, art, design, all together into one place. And so I just thought, well, if this kind of makerspace, a fab lab culture doesn't exist, what about I just build it? A lot of people think that being a maker is having a 3D printer. What I hope in Hong Kong is that the definition of maker becomes more broad. And this is also why I created Maker Bay, is because I want to be part of that industrial revolution where people are inventing technology to clean up the environment rather than destroying it. So I started to get more involved into teaching as well, teaching environmental science and invention to kids, and really loving it.
This is our first plan. So we're gonna have a glass box like this.
So I had every teacher and every student of the school, every week, one class will come to Maker Bay, and we'll look at what are the biggest challenges that are happening right now. The coral reef are a really important part of the Hong Kong ecosystem. Actually, just in this location, WWF Hoi Ha Marine Park, there's 64 hard coral, which is incredibly diverse, more than all of the Caribbeans combined. So even though they cover a small area of the ocean floor, they host a tremendous percentage of the of marine life. Working on coral is incredibly depressing because you go and map coral, and usually you go the next time and it's worse. And you go the next time and it's worse, and you're just like, it's only gonna get worse. So we want to basically automate the whole process of mapping coral reef, and also identification and estimation of the health of the coral. Yeah, it's not. And then we build these rafts out of bamboo, and then we place a bunch of GoPros underneath it. Basically, it's all the electronics you find in a commercial drone. So you have the propellers, the batteries, the microcontrollers, GPS. I'm going to put it in, and I just need you to control the radio. And then we program the robot to go from GPS position to another GPS position to do like a scanning pattern. So we basically scan the ocean floor, and every half a second it would take a picture. What we're trying to do is to use technology which is similar to what they use in satellite imagery to stitch all the pictures together to make a very high-resolution map. And then we use artificial intelligence and computer vision to classify the corals. You call me back and you tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right now, we are at the R&D phase, but our goal eventually is to mass produce those drones. If we're successful, we hope to map all the world's coral and at the same time feed this information to scientists.
After Chumby went belly up, I could do whatever I want. And then actually I'd moved to Singapore at the time.
Coming to Singapore, man, it's been 11 years. You know that?
Remember back in the day, like, when we first came here, we started Beer Friday, right? Do you remember why we did that again?
I think it's because Chumby was no longer a thing.
Right.
Was that it? So
Yeah,
Chumby went out of, because it's a startup. There's only 3 ways a startup can exit, right? They
Right.
can either make it big, they can get bought out, or they can fail.
Right.
And Chumby didn't make it big. And so we decided, you know what? Let's just stay here. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's keep designing hardware.
Right.
Maybe we can make something that we want to use that isn't necessarily what somebody else wants to use.
So Sean was a Chumby employee, and he was one of the guys I brought out here from Chumby. He's a brilliant, brilliant firmware engineer and learned hardware actually being out here in Singapore. Now he's a brilliant hardware engineer as well. I remember, you know, it was just like, I want to build a computer. All right.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the sort of thing that you always do for me, as a kid growing up. Like, you could buy the name brand PC, or you could build one with parts, which usually involved buying like a branded motherboard and a branded video card and putting that in. I'm like, well, why stop there? Why not just like build the motherboard?
Yeah, build the computer that we wanted. At the time, no one else had thought you could build a laptop in low volume. And so part of it for me was figuring out, how do you build something as complex as this on a shoestring budget? And we did like 500 units. Like, this is like nothing. Like, you know, Apple would prototype at 10,000 units. That would be like a first run, like early run. I did 500 units, grand total, right? And other companies would spend $250,000 just to get the tooling. I spent like $30,000, $40,000, whatever it was, like a tenth of what they did. And so, you know, if you saw a picture of it, you'd be like, it's a little weird looking, right? Intentionally so. We wanted to, I actually, again, the design was intentionally, I wanted to open up and show the circuit board on the inside. It was a very sort of loud statement. The screws are very prominent. Like, this very sort of, you know, rah, maker in your face kind of thing. Do you remember where the Novena name came from?
I think you decided when we came to Singapore that you should start naming things after MRT stations.
Right, because there's lots of them and they keep making more.
They keep making more.
But it was definitely because it was a metro station.
Yeah.
It was within the theme of naming things after metro stations. For me, it's very important to dispel the notion that electronics cannot be taken apart, right? And so a lot of times when I make these sort of more flagship projects, I want to almost feature the screws, feature the screwdriver, and invite people to take it apart. And so the screws are there, and it says, this is how you take the bezel off, and you see what's on the inside, and you should do that. And here is the screwdriver to do it. And I want, in a way it is like torch passing, I guess, but I just want to, I don't think everyone has to take it apart, but I just want to put the idea back in people's head that you can take it apart. You know, this getting out there and establishing itself sort of quieted the skeptics a bit about sort of what was possible with an open hardware model.
I'm still using the designs from this thing today. This is built, this is tested, this is 7 or 8 years old.
Battle tested.
Battle tested.
Yep, battle tested.
So you know this works, and so you save money by being able to just copy this and use it in future products.
Why throw away an old design if it works? Use it. Yeah.
No, I mean, so this is actually a question I still get to this day. Is like, do you have any patents to your name or anything like that? And like, no.
Yeah.
But we've got this, which is you know, it was pretty groundbreaking for the time. Like being able to have this thing, like literally from the moment you apply power.
Yeah.
It's all open.
Here's a counter question you should ask the people who ask you how many patents you have. Say, how much money have you ever made off of patents? Right?
Yeah.
Most people, at the best case, they got a little token reward from the company, and the company made all the money. They actually didn't make any money at all. If you look at the names, like it's actually owned by the company. On the other hand, you know, the cost to share ideas is almost nothing, right? But then for me to be able to put something out, have someone come up with a better version of my design and me put it back into my own design. How much will I have paid a consultant in a Fortune 500 company to close that cycle? Been a lot of money. It's, you know, I think the value's there. It was really about learning. It was about learning, getting the idea out there and kind of inspiring people to do stuff like that. And almost immediately after that, some people were building laptops. They took cues and figured out clever ways to reduce costs and make it look more normal. And I was like, this is great. My work is done. I like to say a good engineer's job is to put themselves out of a job. Right? If an engineer built something correctly, you'll never need service, you never have to go back to that again, and the guy's out of a job, right? And so I know I've done a good job when they want to fire me. And so at some point in time, if I've done my job right, you know, everyone will be a better maker than me.
The Ocean Imagineer project, which is a project we're doing right now, is still under development. The Hong Kong Art Center came to Maker Bay to visit because he was looking for a workshop to train young artists to use machines, basically. And then one of the curators, Ian Leung, starting to look into the work that I was doing and found that I'm doing some work with WWF, building like ocean drifters and all these like ocean-related projects. And so they reached out to me and asking me, could you make an artwork that is connecting with the history of North Point and that is something on the water that people can relate to. North Point is trying to rebrand itself as a kind of cool and hip, transitioning from industrial area to being like a sort of a hipster and up-and-coming place. And the waterfront of North Point used to be its identity. Before there were humans in North Point, they were actually like an incredible fauna and flora. And most of these animals are displaced, so they are dead. And so my argument was that if you ever want to bring back clean waters in North Point, it's not about just putting some expensive machinery to clean the water. You need to bring the biology. You need to bring the animals back. Especially the filtering animals. Hey.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. Here to see some oysters.
Yes, that's a lot of oysters.
So, here we're in an abandoned oyster farm.
Yes.
So these mushrooms that you see here, they are growing on these concrete poles, which means that it's had a lot more time for the oysters to kind of fuse together and recreate miniature reefs.
Right.
So what I also wanted to show you, let's say for example, this guy here, these oysters are fusing together and that's why they're creating this reef. And you can see this 3D structure, which is very, very complex.
Yeah.
It has lots and lots of holes, nooks and crannies, and that's what's creating habitat for a lot of biodiversity.
It's a whole city.
It's a whole city, and that's why these habitats are so important as nursery grounds for baby crabs, but also juvenile fish. And they do everything that coral reefs do, or most things, but they do one more thing, which is they filter water.
Yeah.
And a Hong Kong oyster, which is around maybe 3 years old, will filter 30 liters of water in an hour. So if you count how many hours they're active in a day, in the summer, where they filter more, that's around 500 liters of water.
For one oyster.
For one oyster.
And so my proposal with the Ocean Imagineer is to bring a small ecosystem and test which animal can filter the water best. So that's the first scientific question we're asking. The second question we're asking is, can we produce solar energy and hydrogen gas? So what I found doing this research is that actually if you put solar panel on top of the oyster hatchery or the oyster farm, you can produce a lot of electricity. Maybe we could use this electricity on board to break the water into hydrogen and oxygen, H2O. And hydrogen is the energy of the future. It is the cleanest type of energy. This one is an air quality sensor called the air node. This is a radioactivity sensor. So this one measures radioactivity. So with this, we have a lot of information: temperature, atmospheric pressure, humidity, radioactivity, air quality, and we provide data to a lot of people. So it's like a whole data package. And so I just realized that, okay, well, we could build this beautiful floating artwork, but at the same time, we could improve the environment by filtering the water, by increasing biodiversity, and we could also produce the cleanest energy on the planet. And if we could wrap those three things together and benefit the people of North Point, that could be something that is scalable. As an inventor, I feel like I can come up, and I do come up with so many ideas all the time. Like this, sir?
No, he has to join the body.
Ah, what do I do? I'm proud of the work that I've been doing more like on the sort of nonprofit and research side, but I feel like I'm still like a failed sort of industrialist. Like I haven't really manufactured something on a really large scale. But on the other hand, I realize like if my talent is coming up with those ideas and prototyping them and showing the world that it can function, and then somebody else manufacture them and make tons of money with it, that's perfect for me. So do you think the dragon is going to be fast?
Yes.
Like how fast?
Very fast.
very, very super fast. If I can teach young people to get inspired, to care about the environment, and to trust in their own capacity to do a change, then that's time well spent.
I'm really interested in how makers can do things that initially don't have a good business model. I mean, the web didn't have a good business model when it started. You know, the internet, open source didn't have a good business model. But we created them anyway. And I think we need to do things because they need to be done.
Wait, I'm gonna hold on.
Ready? Oh, look how relaxed.
You're so relaxed. 1, 2, 3, go!